In today's episode of the Fit for Fortune podcast, I'm welcoming Calum Raistrick. My history with Calum started about 7 years ago, which I doubt he remembers when I applied to be coached by him, but he was already too busy back then. If he took me on then, I wouldn't still be a skinny boy. Calum started off coaching Gen Pop clients with body composition goals and worked his way up to becoming one of, if not the top bodybuilding coach in the UK, with 26 IFBB Pro cards and 6 Olympia qualifications among his athletes. He is the founder of a bodybuilding prep and physique specialist company, ProCoach, where he has, I think it's growing so fast I can't really keep up, but I think he has 7 coaches working for him. And he recently launched the Institute of Coaching Mastery, an education portal for coaches that allows him to not only shape physiques anymore, but keep further shaping the future of coaching itself. In today's episode, I'm hoping to hear Calum's thoughts specifically on female dieting. I'm your co-host, David Mirza. Your host today will actually be Arsia, my head of online coaching at Catalyst. Calum, under what circumstances would you have a female do a blood test before attempting a fat loss phase?
We're going to get straight into questions. Let's do it. What circumstances for a blood test before starting a fat loss phase, yeah?
Yep.
It's probably relative to the coach and the level of coaching relationship. If it was me when I was, back when I was PTing, or if it was me back when I first started online coaching, that was something that was more so like accessibility dependent. So whether they could actually afford to budget in blood work through a coaching process. And I think general pop, you're still going to benefit from blood testing in any of those circumstances. If it was us now and we were working with a competitor or someone that was Gen Pop, I would do blood work for everyone at the start of the coaching process before they begin anyway. There'd just be an initial health screening. But from a female fat loss perspective, I think most of the time for most general circumstances, the bloods will be done in response to something that's been picked up in the actual coaching process has already started as to why fat loss may be slower than it was initially anticipated, or why the body is being more resistant to change. And then blood work probably tends to be a little bit more reactive more than proactive, doesn't it? But like right now, because we're in a position where we've done this so long and I can see the value in it, we can run blood work as early as possible. And for a lot of the clients that we work with, when they're competitors moving beyond the Gen Pop, we do blood work just from the standpoint of seeing where the athlete's health is at that point. But even for non-competitors, you're still going to get a massive benefit in just having an initial screening before you kick things off. From a female fat loss perspective, we can look at profiles of sex hormones. We can look at thyroidal health and function prior to a dieting phase, and you can get a pretty good estimate. Even like inflammatory levels, if it's a Gen Pop client and their lifestyle's pretty poor, you can get a good estimation of how responsive that body is going to be, within the first kind of 6 to 8 weeks of the coaching process.
Talking about thyroid, progesterone, testosterone, and also the menstrual cycle, at what point during the menstrual cycle would you suggest to get those tests done, because they do vary during that whole month?
I would consistently test between day 19 and 21. So leading up to that midpoint of the cycle. The big thing for the menstrual testing is if we're gonna test, I would just do the analysis on a like for like basis. So even if you had a female test relative to menstrual cycle, if you did it on between that 19 and 21st day, even if you had a female test in a certain circumstance where it was on either end of that spectrum, at least have it in a predictable place where it's the same at each point of analysis. Okay.
And relating to complications when females start to diet, amenorrhea, that's something that happens quite often. I saw in one of your posts, one of your clients for about 11 years didn't get a period, and you seem to have fixed that. Would you mind speaking a little bit more about that, and what are the long-term risks about stuff like amenorrhea?
Oh, yeah, I know what you mean. We just done a module on the advanced female phys module on the ICM. We've just done a amenorrhea kind of management overview of like the female triad with Gen Pop and with competitors. With our bread and butter now, for people that are stepping on stage, it's very, very common to see. Because most of those individuals are like serial competitors where they're going in and out of contest preps, they're going in and out of darting phases constantly every single year. And the mismanagement of that, and I think ethically coaching wise, is a pretty big red flag there, where if you're not spending enough time to get that female at a point where her body's back at homeostasis for a long enough period of time, like if you do that for 3, 4, 5 years on the trot, you're going to have a pretty destructive impact on their health and their blood work longer term. From a Gen Pop standpoint, I think the loss or irregularity of the menstrual cycle, if it's not something specifically related to, maybe they have irregularity of menstrual cycle from PCOS or endometriosis or something that's been there maybe pre-existing for a longer period of time, you are probably going to see that in poor lifestyle circumstances, high stress, high sympathetic drive circumstances, or like what's the typical, I don't want to say typical, but like why do clients in those situations come to us in the first place? Because the chances are they've tried and they've failed. And a lot of the females are in a position where they've tried and they've failed a lot of times, and they're just constantly yo-yoing in and out of a deficit, where they may have lost their cycle a year ago in a deficit, but they haven't spent a long enough period of time actually rebuilding where they're at for that to even be reinstated. And I've seen that countless times where it's been multiple years where that's been going on. And when you're looking at amenorrhea, I'd look at and a lot of females will ask, how long do you think it will take for me to get my menstrual cycle back? Or how long do you think it will take for me to get my blood work back in check? And you can use the analogy sometimes of like walking into a forest. If you've walked into a forest for 3 days and you're in this deep into this forest, third day on your hike, you're not going to be able to get out in 6 hours. It's going to take 3 days. And sometimes you might get lost, and it's going to take 5 days because something's gone wrong or something's happened in the process. So you can use the analogy, the rebuilding of that may take just as long as it did to actually happen in the first place. So the circumstance that you said, the female was, she'd gone through a lot of pubescent and teenage anorexia. And there you have a massive energy deficit and high stress that I think the older an individual like that gets, whether it's male or female, you've got stress both in terms of an energy deficit and, chronic undereating, but also the psychological stress that's there that's very hard to get grip of. And you'll have seen in the past, a lot of the individuals that go through those cycles, as they get a little bit older and they start getting into training, it not only goes from food restriction, but it also goes from food restriction and over exercise. And then you've got like both ends of the extreme where you've got high output and virtually no input. And that had been going on for a while. And I think that's very, very common to see as well nowadays. The more we kind of play into body image and social media and the pull that has and the impact that has, the more common we're gonna see that happen. And the scary thing is in those situations, then you start to layer on the accessibility that females have to enhancement, the accessibility that females have to thyroid medication where they don't know what they're doing, the accessibility that females have to lipolytics that, is just being used in ill practice. Them knowing that if they use those tools, even if they use them, what we'd see as outlandishly incorrect, they know they're going to get a response from them. So they know, right, in the drawer, I've got this. So if I need to lose a load of weight, I can actually use that for 4 weeks and just get it gone. But they're not looking at what happens after those 4 weeks. They're always looking at what's in front of them. But it's the bit after that that catches them up. And you'll get those clients that will be in that repetitive cycle, that vicious cycle for a long, long period of time.
When it comes to restoring a menstrual cycle that has been lost, other than managing psychological stress, managing training volume or not over-exercising, and managing a calorie deficit or just eating a little bit more, is there anything else that you do? And if someone has not had a cycle for such a long time, is there any difference, or do you just do the same thing for a longer time?
So I think even the depths of the coaching process with those individuals, they are going to be a client profile that will need more from you. More from you in terms of being able to build a deeper level of rapport. But I think if you're on those grounds, you must already have struck some level of good foundation of rapport, because they probably wouldn't be opening up to you on that level about those things if they weren't comfortable saying it. How many times we have female clients where you learn a lot more about them, not at the start, but 6, 8, 10, 12, 16 weeks down the line when they kind of know what you're about and they're comfortable with opening up to you. And that's where you can really start to make the change. So I think that psychological, communicative aspect, whether it's on the wavelength that you use for them being able to check in with you and give more detail and more feedback for their week, not only what's happened in the gym, but what's happened outside of that, and looking at managing their week as in the full week of everything happening in their life, as opposed to just the hour that they're in the gym 3 days a week. Because in the grand scheme for those individuals, training's not even the emphasis there. It's everything else around that, and trying to get them usually to train less in those circumstances, less output, less expenditure, less overactivity, less over, step targets being super high or cardio being that it doesn't need to be there. It's allowing them to be comfortable with those decisions being made, because they've probably been habits for a long period of time that are hard to break. And, energy balance is an important one, but also what you're deriving from that energy intake being increased, like the nutritional yield of the energy intake being increased. So trying to increase nutrient density within the diet as well, trying to bring up dietary fat levels because they're typically low for a long period of time. Like, I'll give you a scenario, like in those circumstances, what you're going to see is the repetitive foods being eaten. It'll be like egg whites, or it'll be, I have 3 whey shakes a day, or it will be, I have a salad with a little bit of this or that. Or egg whites is a really common one where they're like, I don't know why I've got such chronic digestive stress. And then you remove egg whites and suddenly they're absolutely fine. But like those little things where, if they're on 3 or 4 foods that they're only eating for their whole calorie intake, they're probably 3 or 4 foods that aren't very nutrient dense, that don't have a lot of phytonutrients, they don't have a lot of fiber. They're not really getting anything from the diet that they're on. So we're increasing calories, but we're also trying to increase the yield of the overall calorie intake they're actually having in the first place. And suddenly you're then in a position where the body's not only being nourished from a caloric perspective, but it's also being nourished from a nutrient perspective. And you're covering both sides there. Instead of just relying on, all right, let's just take a multivitamin, increase calories with you tracking macros, you're probably going to be in a position where you need to hold the hand a little bit more in terms of, let's open up the box here in terms of introducing some new food groups and getting you comfortable with these things, and adding a little bit more diversity there in terms of colors and variety, more single ingredient foods, and build on that one step at a time.
When it comes to these females opening up to you as a coach, what are the things that you can do to speed this up? And especially when, other than obviously being a coach that cares and communicates, and especially when someone is as busy as you are, how can you maintain that level of relationship?
Systems. It's just your systems in place. How you're moving through that coaching process. Some of those clients you might need to, and the longer you do this, the more you can probably align your coaching style and your setup. But you may find that even on an online basis, you may find that once you've worked with a few of those clients that require that level of time and that level of input, you may need to create a service or a package of coaching which relates to a deeper level of communication that individual will need. So it might not be a Loom check-in or a WhatsApp level of communication. It might be, right, every week we need a 45-minute video call, or every week we need to get on Zoom and we need to talk through your week. Instead of just you filling out a piece of paper or a form, I need to speak to you and I need to get in front of you in person. And that might mean that, I need to charge you 50, 100, 150 pounds, whatever it might be, more per week or per month. But you're also in a position where you know that you have full confidence in the actual ability for you to get a lot more out of that coaching process and a lot more value to them when it's delivered in that manner. You may need to dedicate more time, and they need to invest more as a result of that. And then just the systems and the efficiency in which you can, communications is pretty simple. Like, you're going to use some form of communication platform, some form of messaging platform. You're going to have some form of app or Google Drive software or something like that where you have your systems in place. And if that's in place, realistically, it's not a, even if they're checking in with you and you're doing 2 check-ins a week, or you're doing multiple check-ins a week, like, it's no different to if you're working with some athletes checking in every day of the week for several weeks in a row when they're in contest prep. So, doing 2 check-ins a week with a Gen Pop client that's just telling you more about what's going on is not a hardship.
If we circle back to amenorrhea from abuse or just stress and everything, how do you differentiate between someone losing their cycle because of abuse or because of menopause?
Well, you see where that individual is in terms of their age demographic to start. I think menopause, you see some irregularity there in terms of early onset in high stress situations. So you'll typically see individuals where you don't think they're going to be in that realm of where they'd be transitioning in. If they're in a high stress environment, they've got that high sympathetic drive and they may have had menstrual irregularities beforehand. You may see an earlier onset of menopause shifting in the first place. But you know, you can shift that through bloods. But 9 times out of 10 in that situation, you're going to know based on where the individual's coming to you and their age and where they're at in their life as to what kind of zone they're going to be in terms of those 2 shifts there.
And where in the bloods would you notice the difference between someone who's suffering from amenorrhea or menopause?
The amenorrhea, you're probably going to see markers derived from the GI in terms of nutrient absorption. You could see inflammatory levels. The individual that we spoke about before with the longer term amenorrhea, I remember, I don't know if I'll have the blood work because it was so long ago, but I remember her C-reactive protein was like 11 or something. It was very high inflammatory levels. White blood cell count was lower. Obviously FSH and LH were suppressed. With menopause, we're going to see an increase in response there with obviously trying to drive the hormone higher anyway. But most of the individuals in that situation are going to be going on to HRT if they're monitoring that. Most of the clients that you're going to see coming in with menopause will be aware of them being at that point in their life. And then also, I'd say, it's hard to say a number, but I'd say 80% of the people that we're seeing with amenorrhea are going to be typically in that 18 to 25, maybe a little bit lower age demographic. And that's where, you know, I'd pretty confidently say the majority of that is from ED related backgrounds as well. Which, you know, the stuff that we do and, you know, a lot of the physique stuff that's so body image driven, just goes hand in hand, isn't it? That's the vicious cycle there and why they end up in that situation the majority of the time. And there you have another psychological layer there in regards to what you're going to have to unravel in the coaching process to get them back to where they need to be. Which sometimes if they're on that younger spectrum, sometimes ethically you need to be pretty careful with how you're managing that in the first place. Like there's been situations where I used to coach non-competitors where it was more gen pop, where if they were in a position where they're a little bit younger than I was comfortable with coaching in terms of like the actual psychological element of what was going on, I would just refer out straight away if that was the situation. Or if it was me in a position where I felt, you know, maybe it was 8, 10, 12 weeks later down the line, and I felt as I didn't have the capacity to potentially handle it as best as I could do at the start, or it just turned out to be more of a substantial problem than I initially thought of, which sometimes happens. Like sometimes we'll get into the 8th or the 9th or the 10th week of a coaching process and be like, I feel like I'm a little bit out of my depth here in terms of how much help she actually needs on this. I would just refer out instead of just continuing to take the payment and just dish off the check-ins and be like, right, well, let's just wait another week. The chances are if you're thinking that already, it's never going to change. So you just need to be in a position where you need to, out of respect for them and you as a professional, get into a position where you're referring that out to someone that you trust.
Referring out to a therapist or a doctor or another specialist coach, or
like I've used specialist coaches before, but most of the time would have been a therapist.
You also mentioned HRT. How do you think about hormone replacement therapy for women versus men?
Well, males, I think, was probably more commonplace a longer time ago, but it's very commonplace now, even to the point where you're going to get guys that are like 29 and be like, yeah, I need to go on HRT right now. Just because of the accessibility of it. And the last couple of years that has been spoken about more on mainstream stuff as well, like on mainstream podcasts. You're going to see it a lot more prevalent, particularly in the US. Like there's a big commercial side to TRT in the US, way more than over here in the UK. And that's been popularized heavily on the male front, but I think the female side is now starting to catch up now in terms of HRT application, particularly kind of 35 plus in terms of age demographic. I think from a female perspective, you're probably in a position where accessibility still is a little bit harder. Finding a good practitioner that can prescribe things appropriately to you probably still is a little bit harder. But it is getting a lot better in general practice. And in those situations for a lot of the females that will be looking at HRT that aren't in a position where they can access it from a medical ground. They're probably going to find means of doing it themselves and just getting advice in terms of what they need to do and how to monitor that.
Who should and shouldn't do it, and what are the signs when you should start?
I'd just say you got to be careful with what you say there, but I'd just say just go off tangibles and go off hard numbers. If you don't have hard numbers in front of you, you shouldn't be doing anything, whether you're male or female. Like the numbers on paper or the numbers on blood work, and getting some form of advice from those hard numbers will be where you place your protocols and the adjustments that you're making with those hormone ranges. So if it's like a female going through 40s and she's going on HRT prescription from a GP, it will be like estrogen gel. It will be Utrogestin, which is like progesterone tablets, and it will be like Testagel, or it's very rare that they'd use HRT in injectable form for testosterone. It's probably gel, but you can get it in. You can get microdosed testosterone for testosterone-based HRT, but it'd be like an estrogen, a progesterone, and a testosterone. But you're doing that in response to you running your blood work and finding a practitioner that will listen to that and put together a HRT protocol in accordance to that. If you don't have the ability to do that, then just don't shoot in the dark. You need to be in a position where you're going off hard numbers, because then you can run, whether it's every 6 months or every year, run analysis off reviewing where those numbers go and trend over time. So you can just keep yourself in an appropriate range at all times. Just like if a male had TRT testosterone replacement, where they were looking at, testosterone and estradiol and maybe a prolactin and SHBG, once a year on TRT, it would just be the same with the female.
I think a lot of women think that HRT can interfere with fat loss or weight loss. What do you think of that? Is that based in science?
I would almost say HRT not being used with a low hormone state would be a bigger impact on fat loss and progression than if it was used. Even from an athlete perspective, particularly with testosterone, the physique development, overall tissue retention in dieting phases, and the ability for tissue growth to occur, keeping more optimal ranges and stable ranges year round is anecdotally is definitely a big shift there in terms of the rate of physique development, or the ability for them to maintain that rate of physique development for a longer period of time when it is in place.
To circle back to Gen Pop a little bit, a lot of males usually do TRT when they get older, and as their hormones start to not crash but start getting lower. In menopause, females, their hormones crash even more significantly if we look at the percentages than men. How would TRT work for females during menopause? And how much more significant would that be than someone who's in their 30s or 40s where they haven't gone through that big fluctuation?
Particularly for estrogen, I think testosterone you're going to see diminishing return anyway. Anywhere after that, 30 plus. For estrogen in particular with menopausal situations. The HRT application from a progress standpoint, you'd see across the board improvements in recovery there in terms of training response, but look at the impacts outside of training there in terms of their well-being, mental and emotional stability, and the influence that has on just biomarkers and general well-being across the week. And also sleep quality and consistency of sleep quality as well there. If you take those three, it's having a pretty substantial influence on the ability for that client to progress through, a muscle gain orientated phase or a fat loss phase. So if you took two identical female clients going into that process that were in a position where they were 1, 2, 4 years into menopause, and you had those, maybe at the start you had those acute rising levels of FSH and LH and that subsequent drop in estradiol that you see in that shift. If you have one individual with no HRT at all, not even testosterone as well, and you have one individual that was replacing what was needing to be replaced, I think if you had some, I don't know if it's been done or not, but I think you've had some form of analysis over like performance markers or like a fiber biopsy in training in terms of muscular size or strength, and you had an analysis on a DEXA scan, it would be pretty interesting to see the advancement in the HRT crowd relative to the non-HRT crowd, because I wouldn't have like biopsy data. I wouldn't have DEXA data for 99% of those clients or any of those clients for most time. But visually and where they are in terms of progression on their timelines, there is quite a substantial shift there in terms of when those things are put in place, because more often than not in those situations, it's clients that have been there for maybe 1 or 2 years, and they come to you thinking something doesn't quite feel right, or my training's really gone down the pan since the last 2 years, or my sleep's terrible. I'm in a position where I don't even want to train because I'm so knackered. Like, those are the bigger the hurdles in terms of physique development. They're not sleeping. They can't adhere to a diet. They can't stick to the plan you're giving them. They can't come into the gym with any level of energy and train in the first place. As soon as those things start to correct, their ability to progress starts to substantially correct as well. So I think from a female perspective, menopause being poorly managed is kind of just creating more hurdles for them to actually make progress in the first place. It's not necessarily limiting their ability to progress on a direct level, but it's making it a lot harder to actually stick to that process and effectively get results because of so many things they're going to have to experience through that. You might be able to hear my dogs in the background. Sorry.
Thank you. Talking about hurdles in non-menopausal women, what do you think is one of the biggest failures or setbacks in blood work or even in dieting that females go through throughout a fat loss phase?
From an overall blood analysis standpoint within calorie deficits?
Yeah, what seems to crash and what can help to reduce that crash? What do you do to mitigate the crashing of those biomarkers?
Yeah, the like negative adaptations, I guess. So like longer term calorie restriction, I'd say you're probably going to see even more of an impact when they're on longer term calorie restriction and very low fat levels in terms of fat levels being maintained. Androgen and estrogen suppression over the long run, because typically in those, the good example would be like take a female competitor that's just come through contest prep and they're out on the other side. It'd be very similar if it was a prolonged gen pop female that was dieting for a long, long period of time, maybe before the coaching process started. You're going to see suppression in androgens. You're going to see suppression in estrogens. You're going to see a suppression within the menstrual cycle. You're going to see a reduction in LH and FSH production. And you're going to see a suboptimal adaptations to the thyroid as well. But you can also see suboptimal adaptations to the thyroid on the other end of the spectrum as well, where you might have, and it might not be, one of the things to talk about as well on this call is the prevalence of autoimmune-based issues with the thyroid and how frequently that happens now, because we'll get to that in a sec. But it might not be something that's clinically, like subclinical diagnosis, but the thyroid is also a huge one there in terms of particularly longer term deficit exposure, what's having negative adaptations occur. And the easiest way of breaking that up is just how you're setting up the client timeline. So just putting yourself in a position where if you have a client that is, regardless of where they are in the spectrum of body composition, whether they're carrying a lot of body mass or less, and there's less of a pull in terms of overall fat loss that needs to be yielded, just budget for non-enhanced, for Gen Pop. Just budget, and don't be afraid to budget a longer period of time to get a diet done, because then you always have time to speed up or slow down that coaching process at any given moment, particularly for someone that you never worked with before, where you don't have any previous data. But also, the ability to run diet phases and break up that deficit from a psychological standpoint is a great management tool for longer term deficits. And also from a metabolic standpoint, if you have the ability to break let's say it's a 20-week diet phase or a 24-week diet phase, but we have a diet break that can come in where you can manage training volume or pull down expenditure and lower stress in the body every 6 to 8 weeks, you could almost guarantee that client from a psychological standpoint is going to go through that entire diet process probably in a more effective position of control on the other side. They're probably going to be in a position where they can manage the post-diet phase better because of the position they've maintained through the diet phase. For a natural Gen Pop fat loss client, especially for female, it will be very interesting to see blood work before and after on an individual that incorporated diet breaks as opposed to an individual that didn't incorporate that window back at maintenance or slightly above. Because we use that with our athletes a lot, especially for athletes that are coming from a higher body fat set point. For female athletes, for non-enhanced athletes, it's a really good leverage tool that you can anchor a prep on, whether you use 1 or 2 across the diet phase. They come into real value in those, even in those extremes, but also apply to that Gen Pop situation as well.
What else can you do to manage the post-diet phase better, or to rebound less, or have fewer cravings, less hunger?
So if it was a competitor that I'd be dealing with, and to be honest, it's the exact same as if it was a photo shoot or Gen Pop.
So I'm guessing the leaner the client gets, the more adaptations, or the more extreme the adaptations, but it's still the same adaptations and the same way of managing them.
Yeah, just like the magnitude that it's happening. Easiest way, bar none, is budget enough time and get the end point of where you want that look or body composition or body fat level to be prior to the actual date of the shoot, or prior to the actual date of the holiday, or prior to the actual date of the end point of the timeline. And then reverse them into the actual date at the end point of the process before they get there. So if it was a photo shoot prep and you're in a position where you budgeted, it was in 20 weeks, where it's like, right, I want to use 16 weeks of that 20 weeks to get you to the leanest set point we can, give or take maybe five days or so, 5 to 10 days. But then the last 2 to 4 weeks of that process is not spent in a deficit. The last 2 to 4 weeks of that process is spent pulling output and expenditure back down, back to, normal regular levels that they'd have before the dieting phase happened, like steps, maybe minimal cardio or no cardio. And we're working the calorie set point back to as close to maintenance as we take it, or sometimes even above that, based on where they are fat loss wise and metabolically. We reverse calories back up before the photo shoot in the first place, which adaptation wise can have a great impact on the actual physique itself if they are in actual sufficient levels of condition in the first place. If they're still carrying body fat, then be careful. But eliminating fatigue and allowing muscular fullness and those adaptations to return will deliver a better look on the day in the first place. So if you're looking at how to bring your clients into photo shoots as effectively as you can, or even into, even if they're going on holiday and they're asking you the question, how do I stop myself ballooning up in those first few days while I'm away? Well, you want to get all those adaptations that happen on the other side done slowly in a gradual manner over a longer period of time. So I'm actually going to increase the calories back to maintenance over 2 weeks before you even go away. So when you actually go away, you're not unfathomably hungry at all times, and you've got a better ability to control your eating habits, but also your body's on a lot more of an even keel in terms of fatigue management and the relationship with the diet in the first place, the relationship with eating patterns and habits there. And you can manage that post-diet phase more effectively as a result.
I think I've seen some studies that were saying how these little diet breaks don't offset any of the adaptations when it comes to leptin, for example. You would need to take like a 6-week diet break. So why do these mini breaks help anyway? Why do you think?
I think it's purely psychological. From the standpoint of the impact that has on them knowing that they can, right, I've got 6 weeks where I need to get my head down here. Adherence probably goes through the roof as a result of that, because they know there's that little carrot dangling in front of them saying, I've got this window of time where I can chill out a little bit. Whether you incorporate a few more flexible sociable meals in that aspect, and they can go and see their friends or have a meal with their family or their partner, like that reduction in stress itself has an incredibly positive impact on the overall process, but also it allows them to be very focused and accurate and adherent in the actual blocks of work that they need to get down and get the job done. Like if you have a 5-day window out of a 20-week diet, we're not going to see big impacts there metabolically in terms of suddenly massive increases in these hormones, but we are going to see the ability for them to go back to the deficit fresh, with sleep in a better place, with stress levels in a much more controlled manner. And more so, most importantly in the diet phases, like, especially for I don't want to say non-serious, but what's the biggest pitfall we have with coaching when we first start PTing, we first start coaching on a very, very base level? It's just adherence, isn't it? It's like getting clients to follow the plan and molding a plan around what they can stick to. Well, in those diet phases, and that goes up to all levels. Like I've got athletes that have competed at the Olympia before that have not adhered to their diet. So it goes up to all levels when you're in that situation. If you can just bulletproof adherence, you're going to get better results with every single client. So if we can coach in a manner that bulletproofs adherence and allows the psychological aspect of what they're doing to be less of a burden on their body, we're going to get better results as a response to that. So we get a metabolic benefit from the diet break because of how accurate and how hard they can work outside of that time, because of the diet break allowing them to do it. and a big positive in the ability for the body to pick up response again once it's been able to shift and drop down stress in the period of time that you've pulled back.
So when it comes to giving such a short diet break to a jump up female, for example, would you push carbs higher? Would you increase fats? Or would you just optimize for them to be able to switch off and eat within limits, whatever they want to?
I might add in 1 or 2 meals where there's less number crunching and analysis going in their mind. I think that's important to have some level of reset there. But the majority of it does need to be under control and have some kind of system that they're following. So carbs would be pushed, dietary fats would be pushed, protein would probably stay at the same baseline it was, if not maybe have a little bit of a reduction in protein. But the total calorie amount would push up, and the majority of those calories, or all of those calories, would be coming from carbohydrates and fats. More so food volume wise from carbohydrates, but fats would obviously be contributing to the calorie input as well. If I was going to give a ratio, I'd say for most clients, 75% carbs, 25% fats, or 70-30, close to that.
You keep mentioning the importance of fats when it comes to females dieting. How important is fat quality versus total fat intake?
I'd rather have a female client on 50% less dietary fat, but have all those fats come from high nutrient derived fats or essential fatty acids than double the fat, but it all comes from peanut butter. You're in a position where how many times have we given a client macros and they'd be like, right, you've got 40 grams of fat to eat. And they're like, right, I'm going to have egg whites and I'm going to have peanut butter through my entire diet, because then I can have 75 grams of peanut butter a day. But then we actually strip that back and think, well, the yield of that is pretty minimal. So yeah, the quality of that is huge. And sometimes if they're on macro based diets, you might need to just put some non-negotiables in place in terms of, right, out of that 40 grams of fat, this is going to come from omega-3. This is going to come from maybe, a bit of monounsaturated oil, or this is going to come from X fat source, just so you can make sure that it's kind of budgeted into the plan, if that makes sense.
You keep mentioning bodyweight set points. How do you recognize these and how do you get past them?
Bodyweight set points with what regard? What do you mean?
When you were talking about people dieting, you said that maybe we want to find like the lowest set point or set weight.
So you like sticking points with like fat loss, you mean?
Yeah. What their body weight gravitates towards?
In the context of getting as lean as possible, or in the context of which phase?
In a dieting phase, yes.
In a dieting phase,
as well as coming out of a deficit.
Coming out of a deficit, you could probably get if you had time with them coaching before the diet began, you could probably get a good, accurate estimate of where you feel as though they're in a kind of balanced, comfortable position, whilst not then allowing to accumulate too much body fat on the other side. Because like a post diet phase needs to be a body weight increase, a stress reduction, but it doesn't need to be a substantial amount of body fat gained. Some body fat gain is appropriate to get them there, but it doesn't necessarily need to be, right, we need to go back to where you first started on week 1 of coaching, because you've just crossed off a lot of the wrongs that you've just corrected. So whether you do that in terms of actual scale weight per week with the gain rate after a diet phase to allow yourself to regulate that appropriately. And it might be like, right, the first week will allow for 3% total body weight shift. Second week, it might be right now down to 2. Now we're looking at more of a 1.5 or a 1%. And then you're back at a point where you're in a pretty controlled state there. But if you're working in week 1, we've gained 3%. Week 2, we've just gained 3% again. Week 3, we've just gained 3% again. You're moving at too much of a rate there to really be in a position in 8 weeks' time where you can still be in a good spot. In a diet phase, if you're reaching sticking points, then the only way to effectively manage that, and in 9 times out of 10, they will probably happen at points where you're already pushing the envelope pretty hard in terms of output or deficit. If you're there, 9 times out of 10, the answer is not just continue to do more and do the same thing. The answer is normally in those situations to do the opposite, reverse, pull back, find a sweet spot again where the body's under less stress, and then go back into the deficit following that. Otherwise, we can spend a lot of time trying to push the client harder, and usually the thing that breaks there is just adherence. It's their ability to actually stick to the plan in the first place. So although, they're on an 800 calorie diet on paper, but twice a week they're falling off the diet and it's adding 2,500 calories to the week. And they're just going in a repetitive cycle the entire time and things start to break down there. So if you are noticing multiple weeks where there's been poor response, it might be time to have one of those little devolume, deload, reset weeks to relinquish the stress that they're in, pull back control, and then go again.
Just for a single week and then go back into it again?
Most of the time, yeah. Most of the time. But don't get me wrong, like sometimes, like I remember there was a client I used to work with at M10 who was like very gen pop to the point where like the entire 6-month coaching process, we just used like precision nutrition based fist, palm size portioning for meals. It was no calorie counting, no MyFitnessPal, nothing. And she was postmenopausal. She was pretty high corporate job, high stress, bigger social life because of work. So like a lot of drink, like she loved the wine, she loved dinners out. So lifestyle change was massive for her. For the first 8 weeks of that process, she didn't even train. She just came into the assessment room and spoke to me. She stuck to a step goal outside of the gym. And for those situations, like the gym itself is a very intimidating environment for most of those individuals. So the worst thing I probably could have done at the start of that is get her on the gym floor in front of 7 other big PTs that some of them are training in the gym. You know, Josh Maley's there that's like 19 foot tall, that's 500 pounds. And it's a very high pressure, high stimulus environment. So the first 8 weeks was just lifestyle. The first 8 weeks was calorie control, better habits, better routine, more discipline, step goal. And she lost 30 pounds in 8 weeks just from a step goal and better eating patterns. 30 pounds. And that 6 months was 80 pounds worth of total weight loss. So it was a new person at the end of that process, both body and mind. Mind was probably more impressive than body because she was an absolute animal at the end of that. Like she was an absolute freak at the end of the process. She loved training, like somebody that you'd never see in the gym before. And she was a total badass by the end of that process, just because she got confidence in herself and she started to love it because she saw the results. But the paradigm and mindset shift is massive there, but that mindset shift will also come with results happening in the first place and them proving to themselves that they can actually do it. But yeah, like that was 80 pounds in 6 months. But there were times in that process where we'd have to pull back and let the body just settle for a period of time, let the mind settle. There might have been a few slip ups that we had to navigate around, and we could almost use that to our advantage. And then we got back to work and we cracked on again. And
when it comes to these body weight set points sort of on the way down, so while dieting, can anybody sustain anything? So for example, let's say hypothetically, I have someone that's like 64 kilos. It's clearly a set point. They're plateauing a little bit. Adaptations are increasing, and they want to sustain 62 kilos. They could get down to 62. Can they hope to be able to sustain that as well?
And them being very lean in the first place?
Not super lean, reasonably lean.
Yeah, like if you can build habits there where it's sustainable in terms of not having, a crazy level of output to maintain that set point or a very low level of calorie input, it's sustainable. And the irony is in those situations, if they get to that set point where they're like, I feel great here and I can train well, I'm recovering, I like the way I look, like, especially for a female, higher levels of expenditure in terms of like they might need to maintain that set point. They might need to do, 12,000 steps when they started on 8,000. And they might need to do like 25 minutes of list cardio a day to maintain that, but they enjoy cardio, so it doesn't matter. They might need to train 4 or 5 days a week, but they love training, so it doesn't matter. The calorie set point, if they got down to 16, 15, 1,400 calories to get there, if they're on it with adherence, you can probably get them to 1,700, 1,800 a day, 1,900 a day without really seeing any shift in body weight if they're accurate with what they're doing and they're consistent with it. But it's the individuals that say, yeah, I really like this, I want to maintain it. And they have that calorie set point increase, but then they have 2 or 3 meals along the week that is not in the plan. Those are the individuals that can't maintain it because they've just blown past the energy or that they should have stuck to. So a lot of that is if you have a client where it's like, yeah, I'd love to maintain the set point year round, you've got to be like, well, can you tick these boxes to make sure you can actually do that in the first place? And these are the non-negotiables that you're going to have to stick to regardless if that's going to be something that's sustainable year round. And if it's a yes, then sweet, that's going to be your happy set point. If it's a no, then you've got to be smart about it, and you've got to think about what can you do. If I ask you to do something every day for the next 90 days, could you do it? Even when you got kids, when you got, a high pressure job, when you've got work trips, whatever it might be, those are things that you've got to really be realistic about there.
I might just be misunderstanding. I didn't mean someone wanting to sustain a set point, but just under a set point.
Give me an example.
Yeah, like for example, this example that I just said, someone is set point is 64 kilos. They want to get to 62 and sustain 62.
It's the exact same scenario there in terms of like the energy balance and the setup and the protocol they've got to do to get to 62. They can sustain it if they're able to sustain what it took to get there, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Because the only thing that's going to shift in terms of, it's probably easier to look at body weight and body composition. If they had more muscle mass and they had more metabolically active tissue at 62 kilos, then they could probably diet on more food. Whereas if they were 62 kilos with a little bit less muscle and a little bit more body fat, it's probably going to be a lower calorie consumption, right? So, 62 kilos could be two different diets in a couple of years' time. But the only reason why it would be a high calorie diet is if, their activity levels were high, but it's a different plan. If they have more tissue in the first place, then it's more substance required from a dietary perspective, which is why, in those circumstances, when females look at long-term physique progression or long-term sustainability of better physiques, you just look at build more muscle. It's not fat loss orientated. You've got to build more tissue. If you build more tissue, you're going to be a little like this year round for a long period of time and eat loads of calories. But if that tissue is not there, it's never going to happen. Which, you can then link into the training side as well. Like how many females won't want to get stuck into resistance-based training? How many females will have a bit of a phobia towards, training 5 days a week in the gym seems like a lot, when I used to do 3 runs and 1 gym session. But they're also in a position where those clients they've been at that place from a progression standpoint for a long period of time. They've been spinning their wheels for a long period of time. Once they break down that barrier and they start to love that side in terms of progression in the gym and strength and performance and execution, that's where the physique will really start to, physique development for them will be something that skyrockets just because of the response it's occurring that hasn't been there before.
And what do you think about maybe bringing that client a bit lower than the set point, let's say 62, maybe bringing them down to 60 or 59, then allowing them to slightly rebound back up to 62, getting to that original set point that we wanted to stay at, basically bringing them down a little bit lower and then allowing them back up to basically fill back up to 62.
Do you mean like before a photo shoot or something?
No, just if they want to maintain 62, like that's a goal they have, not particularly a photo shoot or anything, but that's a body weight that they have in goal.
So like say for example, you had a female client that inquired and she's like, look, I was 50 kilos 4 years ago. I'd love to get back to 50 kilos. And then you're like, right, let's use that as a metric to work towards, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So if you're in a position where you felt as though it was of value, like maybe it's like, well, let's see what 2 kilograms extra looks like in terms of the visuals and where we go from a fat loss standpoint, and also see if that's sustainable as well in terms of what we're doing to get there. There's no harm in going there. And most of those clients are probably in a position where if they had this hypothetical number of, like you said, 60 kilos, once they're there and they can do it, they're probably going to be the ones that tell you, I wonder what a little bit more looks like. I wonder what it would look like if we got down to 57, or I wonder if I could do 58. I wonder how much better I could be at that point. And then it just gives you the ability to use that into your timeline in the first place. It's not normally, 9 times out of 10, it's not normally the coach saying, let's push 2 more kilos off. If they're like checking in, buzzing every week, happy, you'll be like, well, let's maintain this now for a period of time until that changes. But it's normally the client in the check-in. Once they've done it for a couple of weeks, they're like, actually, I reckon I can get to 58 now. Let's try and push a little bit harder, because they've proved to themselves they can get to 60. So the natural rate of progression there is to continue pushing it.
Thank you. Do you have time to do some personal questions?
Yeah.
So we saw that you're becoming a father soon. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
How do you feel about it?
Shitting myself now, I'm joking. Just it's the perfect balance of excitement and nerves. I think that's probably what everyone says.
I know you as an extremely busy person. Like when you posted that post, I was surprised how many hobbies you have, for example, now. So maybe you're not as busy anymore. I don't know. How are you planning to make time for all of it?
I plan everything. I used to use it on my, I used to have a written method of time planning, but now I just do it on my Google Calendar because it's in front of me every day. But I'll just timestamp tasks for like work blocks in terms of when things need to be done. This podcast goes into the calendar of when I need to be doing things at certain times. And that just fills up through the week. Some stay consistent, some be added in here and there. And then, but you can also do the same thing for when you want to be off work or when you want to be present doing something else. So I think from that side, there is probably efficiency in terms of time management and how regimented you can be with that and disciplined you can be with that with work blocking your work. Because it's very easy to do a lot of work over a very long period of time, but it's also very easy to do a lot of work over a less period of time if you're organized with it and disciplined with it. And I think from a longer term perspective, yeah, like 2021, 2022, when I was, flying to 2 countries every month with clients. I think 2022, when I was with Loki, we did like 28 countries in one year, 28 countries. And obviously some of those were multiple times because we'd go to Europe multiple times with the same shows, like Spain and Portugal. We probably did 2 or 3 times in 1 year. So it's like 35 plus flights in 1 year. So it's like, you're probably averaging 3 a month there. And some of them are long hauls. So some of them like America, we went to Canada once for Toronto Pro. It's not sustainable long term. Because you can do that for 2 years and then it absolutely fries you, and you try and do it again and you realize that you don't have that in you to do it just because of the fatigue that's accumulated emotionally and mentally. Prep coaching is a really emotional thing in terms of, especially when you're traveling and the stakes are high and there's a lot of pressure there, particularly with clients where they've got 1 million followers on social media or they're doing content updates and the anticipation is on the client and the coach at the same time. They're very high pressure situations, but it's just like if we did PT, like when you first start PT for the first 3 or 4 years, you do all the hours under the sun, right? You're there at 6 a.m., you leave at 10 p.m. and you're back in again at 6 a.m. the next day and you never see the light of day. But then I remember having a consult with you maybe 3 years ago, and you were in a position where you were starting to get really busy online. And then you're like, when do I stop that? Or when do I start this? Or how do I nurture both things? Your business model changes based on where you are and how long you've been in it and how hard you've worked, and what you've set yourself up for. And I think it's the same thing here. Like this is why we started the ICM, because it gives me time freedom over, I can get X amount of members on there and generate content, but also have that content able to be serving multiple people as opposed to just one person in a coaching process. We'll in April, we'll launch level 1 pro coach course, which is like a fully encapsulated bodybuilding coach course on a new platform. And that will be the level 1 of that, which again is going to build into the next few years of building 3 levels of education on that side. And that's something else that I couldn't have done that 10 years because I didn't have the experience to do it. But just like when you're building a coaching team now and you're building, everything ahead of you, you can only do it once you've done your time in the trenches and you've actually learned how things work, and you've done it so many times that it's like, right, I think I can teach people how to do this now, or I think I can teach someone else how to do this just as good as I did it. That's just like the evolution of coaching. I think it's going to happen to everyone over time. It's just you've just got to work really hard at the start to be in that position in 5 years time to be in the place where you can have the ability to do that.
I thought you decided to not continue doing muscle mentors because you wanted to go more into coaching. So I was surprised to see you do ICM, is it?
So the muscle mentors was more so the route I was going down with bodybuilding was of the extreme relative to most of the muscle mentors stuff. It was the coaches model. It's like what I did at M10 for like 3 years was coach loads of coaches for a long period of time. And the muscle mentors was born and we coached hundreds and hundreds of coaches through the education platform that I had with Luke. And Luke's 90%, 95% of Luke clients were coaches as well. I think he had a few competitors, but most of them were coaches. And I think when I started to get more results competitively at the start and then a few bigger results, it really started to move quickly in terms of the direction that went from coaching coaches to coaching competitors. And it was just with the education that was going in place with James and Paul as well, when we were all together under one roof, it was kind of pulling really hard, but in two different directions, where it's quite hard to talk about enhanced bodybuilding and like high level biomechanics, and like looking, as silly as it sounds, like this is something that not a lot of people will realize, but from a coaching perspective, the higher up you get competitively within the bodybuilding realm, the less of that knowledge those athletes and clients want to actually hear or want to actually adopt in the first place.
They just want to execute?
They just want to execute. So I very quickly got a pretty hard impression of the fact that if I tried to coach in the way that I used to coach, in terms of, it would be like an iceberg in front of you. Most of those high level athletes want to see the tip, but the programming that you're doing is the deeper part of the iceberg. They'll never see that. They just see a program. You never have to tell them why you've done it in the first place. They don't want to hear it. They just want to get it. They just want to get it done. 90% of people in those situations, they won't bat an eyelid. They won't care. They'll fall asleep. But when we used to coach coaches, they want to know that stuff. That's just as important of a process as it is them getting results. Whereas the competitive side is just a pure results-driven business. Whether that guy that won knew the moment arm of that movement pattern is completely irrelevant, because it's just a judge telling him he's actually won that and that guy's come second. So the whole concept of coaching there had to shift there, in terms of the coaching for me came less, not less informative, but a lot more direct in terms of, right, this is the strategy and these are the plans and you're going to execute and that's done. Instead of the Muscle Mentors was a lot more of an educational, everything was set up to build that coach from a knowledge standpoint as they got results. Whereas the competitive side is, you get results or the client goes. And the longer you work with a client, the more they can kind of immerse themselves in that side. And I have some clients that are really keen on it, that want to do more, and I'll give them more. But a lot of the clients there are just there to get the job done, and they only see the tip of the iceberg. And I just keep the other bit into the programming that they don't ask for and they don't want to know. What's
your vision for ICM? What's your vision for Pro Coach? And what's your vision for yourself for 5 years from now?
I want to get better at golf, because I'm pretty bad at the moment. The ICM is something that I want to keep steering in the direction of physique coaching at a high level. But the reason why I want to start Pro Coach education is because, for example, like I've just released that prep module on the ICM, and you'll have 300 people that will want to ask purely drug related questions. But if I open up that audience to the ICM, it then becomes a drug platform. So I want to make two separate entities there. Is if you're bodybuilding emphasis and you're a hardcore athlete or a coach that wants to go down that route, we've got you covered there. But also if you're a coach in the first 1 to 5 years of your career, that you're on the gym floor, you're starting an online business, and you want to learn the depths of knowledge and application and what you need to know to get your first 10, 20, 30 results, that is the perfect platform for you to have. And just to grow both of those entities at the same time, because like they complement each other. But I want them to be separate things. Like I want them to have their own identity there. Otherwise I'd just done it all under Pro Coach at the same time. And then, yeah, like there are other ventures that will go down, over time, but the last couple of years has really been like the foundations of getting those up and running, and just being in a position where we can just continue to scale them year on year with more content and more value that's added. And when you look at the business model with those things, you're then going on, it's almost like economies of scale there, where one piece of content now serves multiple hundred people as opposed to just one person. So the price point changes, and it's more of an affordable price point relative to what they have access to, but you can scale that much further than one-to-one coaching, where realistically, if you want to maintain the same quality of service, you've got a cap there in terms of what you can actually do from a volume standpoint.
And for yourself, the only dream is to golf better.
At the moment, I'd like to improve, yeah. But it takes a long time.
Okay. Where can people find you?
If you go onto Instagram and just type in Pro Coach, you'll see the team page, and then all my coaches on the team and myself will be on there. We're on YouTube. We're on Spotify. We've got a website. ICM is the exact same thing. Just put in ICM education. We've just started a YouTube channel to put just a video podcast on that. I've actually just started using this podcasting software as well, so thanks for that, because you told me about that last time, which I prefer. And Spotify, iTunes for ICM podcast. And then the ICM portal or education platform is www.icmeducation.com. We have toyed about the idea of potentially migrating the content to School. Have you used School with a K, the School software?
No, heard about it. Haven't used it.
Yeah, I did, because it looks like the community aspect of that might be like the core point of the product.
Do you have any community respect to your current offering?
Yeah, Kajabi has a community, and there might be like 20 or 30 people that will engage with that, but out of the total volume of site, it's just you're constantly trying to get more people to interact and more people to engage, because like that's where a lot of the main value comes from in terms of discussion points and being able to ask case studies. And you have access to me on hand just to ask anything you want there, but it's just getting people to actually, do that in the first place that's the hardest bit, which is why I looked elsewhere, because like maybe there's a platform that allows easier navigation and access to contribute. But again, it'll be things that we can evolve over time.
Yeah, I think that's the main selling point for School.
Yeah.
The community.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming on.
My pleasure. Good to. I thought I booked this the first time, but then you told me that I hadn't booked it, so I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll go and do it again. I'll go and do a try
just
again."
Keep patiently following up. I know you're a busy man.
No, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.